Okay, as you can tell, this video is going to be for how I did like a half brim on a hat. Obviously the picture you see before the video. For the sake of the tutorial, I'm using the red loom, but the same idea can be sized loom for the hat size you want to do. I'm using some leftover yarn, so it's not exactly, I don't know how it's going to look. Just for the sake of the tutorial, I have like this ball of yarn left. Now this has 3 strands in it of leftover yarn. It's got a brown, a black, and a gray. So I'm not quite sure how it's going to look when we're done. And you don't necessarily need 2 strands or 3 strands. Basically, try it out. Try it with just a bulky piece of bulky yarn. Try it with 1 or 2 strands. I mean, basically, it's going to depend on the yarn you're using. But the idea of what you're going to do is pretty much the same. Okay, so you're going to do your slip knot like normal. And you're going to place it on your loom, however you usually start to. So if you're right-handed, left-handed, whichever way you work the loom, but where you would normally start to make a hat. Now you can choose to grab all the strands at once to hide them, but for the sake of this, I will do that because it does make a difference. So you're just going to wrap half the peg. So you're starting here and you're going to work your way to half the peg, or half the loom, sorry. Now it's going to be a little tricky because it is so thick, but all we're working is back and forth to make like a normal brim. That's all it is cutting what you would normally do for a brim in half. There's no specialness to it. For the hat, you see I did do some decreasing in it. And what you can do is kind of go enough and then just hold it up and you kind of eyeball if you're in about the right spot. Like if you look, you could do the math and measure it out, but it's starting here and it's stopping there, which is about half the loom. When you're looking at it, you can kind of match it up. So I think what I need 1 more wrapped. Oops. Oh, come on. Okay, and we got it wrapped, and then what we're going to do is push these down, and you're just going to wrap back to the beginning again. Okay, so you're just going to wrap back to the beginning, and as we've talked about before, the first peg when you're going back to wrap does not have 2 strands, it only has 1. And you go knitting back to the other way, or basically whatever stitch it is that you want to do, you're just going to go back and forth until you get it the length that you would want for your half brim. Now, if you want this brim to stick out more, first let me say, if you've done the normal brim, you know the part where you reach in and pull it up and put it back on the pegs and knit over, and that creates your brim. So if you want this half brim, that's going to turn, you're basically doing the same idea. You're going to make this come down as far as you would want the brim to be. You're going to bring it back up and you're going to knit. And then we will knit around the whole loom. So if you want it to stick out more, say like a baseball cap, then you're probably going to need to find maybe a piece of plastic or something to tuck inside there that will give it the sticking out feel. I'm not sure. For the hat I didn't have anything in it. I just did this technique. I lost my tool. So that's all I did. I went back to the beginning, and I'm just knitting over. A little tricky on the first few because of hiding all those strands. And don't worry about ones that stick out. You can hide them later. They're going to be pretty much hidden in the brim when you flip up the other pieces. And that's all you're going to do is kind of go back and forth. And you can do a simple knit for this because you're going to be folding it in half. You don't necessarily need to go all out in a sense with the stitch you want to do now because you're going to be folding it in half. It's going to get thicker when you do that. You push these down. And again, start back the other way. And again, remember that the first peg is not going to get wrapped because you're going behind it to wrap the next one. So the first peg won't be wrapped. And work your way right back to the other side. And basically do this for as long as you want it to be for your brim. And then come back and we'll show you the next step. Okay, so I went down probably maybe 3 or 4 inches. And again, it's going to depend on what length you want it to be. Because what we're going to do now is you're going to make sure before you bring it up for the brim, that your yarn that you're wrapping with is back to your starting point. So wherever you started, you want it back to the beginning before we start doing the next step. So now all we're going to do is, just like we would for a normal brim, is we're going to reach down in between it and pull it back up and start placing some loops on the pegs. Now because I'm using 3 strands, it's going to make it, sorry about that, it's going to make it a little tricky. So I got to make sure I'm grabbing all 3 strands. So what I'm doing is kind of checking out to see, where these strands loop. Usually you can look at the end and you kind of see where your loops are, and that's going to be kind of where you want to start. And then you just simply start placing the loops on there. So it's usually easier with just 1 or 2 strands, but using 3, it is making it a little trickier. So the look might be a little off for me to show you now because I haven't really worked with 3 strands that much. I'm missing a black, so I'm going to see what I did wrong. Okay. And that's all I'm doing is bring up the 3 strands onto a peg. It's a little tricky, like I said, because of the color. And if you have any loose strands, this is when you're going to tuck them inside. So all I'm doing is bringing it up. And if you need to stretch it, you can have 2 pegs or share 1 loop if you need to, if you don't get it all the way to where the ending part needs to be. And that's all I'm doing. Like I'm having this one share 2 pegs and then grabbing the last one over there. So like this one is sharing 2, which is fine. Then all you're going to do is knit over. It's just like doing a regular brim, you're just doing half of it. And go ahead and knit over. I said because I'm working with 3 strands, it's a little trickier. I want to make sure I'm not grabbing too many as I knit over. Now, like I said, this is going to create a different thickness, and then we're just going to turn around. Too many loops there. We're going to turn around and do this hat like we normally would do a hat. If you want to decrease, then you're going to decrease it. If you want it to be a little more tapered, that's what I did in that video. It's a little more tapered. But basically, if you've ever made a hat before, that's all you're going to do from this step. And now all we're going to do is after almost to the end. Okay, and like I said, it's okay if 2 pegs share 1 strand. Alright, so we got it all knit over. That's what it's going to look like. You're going to push it down. And then you're just going to start knitting the whole hat around. Now what's going to happen is you're going to have 2 loops on this and 1 loop on the other side. So you're going to end up having to decide, like I would do a 2/1 stitch, or yeah, a 2/1 stitch. So that way you're going to go around this side that doesn't have it, is only going to have 1 loop right now. We're wrapping it just like we would a regular hat. But when we get back to the starting point, excuse me, we're going to end up doing a little different of a stitch. We're going to do a tighter stitch because we've got 2 strands, but we only got 1 on this side. So what we're going to do is go around again so that this side will have 3 strands, this side will have the 2. So on this side with the 2, you may, if you're using more than 1 strand like I am, you may have to work 1 peg at a time where you push the pegs down and you're going to take the bottom 2 strands over the top one, or 2 loops, whatever way you did it. Bottom 2 are going to go over the top 1. So you may have to work 1 peg at a time depending on how many strands you're doing. If you're only doing 1 or 2, you might be able to go ahead and wrap it like normal. But because I've got 3, I want to work it 1 peg at a time. Okay, so we're just going to keep going. Got a little cut off there from my webcam. But I'm still finishing up doing the 2 bottom rows over the top row. And then we're just going to wrap like normal. This is where, once we get this wrapped around once, you decide what stitch you want to do. Maybe you want to do a tighter stitch all the way through the hat. Maybe you want to do a chunky stitch. Maybe you just want it a little more loose and open and you're just going to keep it that way. So now we'll hit this point. Now we're just going to wrap this once. So we have 2 strands on this side. Pushing them down as you go, if you need to, until we get back to the starting page. Now what you'll notice is it's going to be 1 strand back at the beginning that actually is only going to have, it's still going to have the 2, so you're going to need to wrap that for the 3 times. Okay, and then we're just going to knit those over. Now this is where you decide how do you want this hat to be. Do you want, what kind of stitch you want to do? Because now you're pretty much at the same base as you were for making any hat. You've made your brim, you've gone around once, now you choose the style of stitch you want. Okay, get that all done. And what's going to happen, you can push them down, because I don't know what size stitch you're going to do, so you can push them down. And then what's going to happen is you're going to make your hat. As you make your hat, this brim will find its way to sticking out. Oops, can't see my hand away. It will find its way to stick out when it's on your head. So what you're going to do is pick your stitch, and you're going to go, now, if you want it to be decreased, like I did on mine, the way I did decreasing, which I kind of saw, I think on Good Knit Kisses, but I don't think I'm actually doing it the exact same way she did, because I think I just decided one day just to play around with it, so I don't know if I got it exactly like that. But I know I've seen people do it, so I just want to be honest that I may have seen it from somebody else's video, and I'm not trying to take it from them, because I don't know if I'm doing it exactly right. But the way I do it is I look at it as if it's a pie, and you have 4 sides, or 4 pieces of the pie, and you kind of can work in the sections to decrease it. But for right now, we want to keep it as big as it is. So I would do a few rows of going around the whole thing, not worrying about decreasing, and picking out what stitch you want to do. So this is up to you. Chunky, tight, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to work on it and get a few more rows down, and then I'll show you how to decrease it, because I might as well make this into a, if I have enough yarn on this, into a cute little baby hat while I'm doing it. So I will do that, and you'll decide how much you want to decrease. I may want to do a little bit of decreasing. I don't believe I did that much with the other hat for my head, and I used the, I believe, green loom for it. So this is a red, which is more for like a baby. So I'm going to go around for a couple minutes and just get a little more going on. I'm probably just going to keep it the regular knit, just to make it a little more faster. But do a stitch you want, and I'll meet you back here in a little bit. Okay, I've knitted a few rows, and I just wanted to show you, now that the brim is actually down further, what it looks like. As you can tell, it's actually starting to kind of take shape. So you can see, I can hold it back for I don't know if you can see, how the brim has started to kind of take shape, which it will stick out more once it's on the child's head. Or at least it should. That's what it did with mine. But this is how the brim looks. So you can see that it's going to pretty much work what you want it to do. Now, if you want to decrease, now I don't know if I'm going to have enough yarn, so that's why I'm going to show you now. Is basically look at it as like it's a pie. And when you think of a pie, you're going to cut it in 4, because we're going to have really big pieces. And you're going to pretty much decrease each corner of the pie, basically, or each section of the pie. As many as you want, 1 or 2. So what we're going to do is we're kind of looking at, and you can kind of view, this being the pointer one, it's kind of your invisible line going up, and then you can do an invisible line going across. If you have stitch markers, go ahead and place them at points that will remind you which section is which. But all you're going to do, this is the way I do it. It may not be the correct way, but it seems to work for me. All I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my first section, or first quarter, excuse me, and I'm going to just decide in the middle to take one set of loops and move them over to the other peg. It might be a little tight depending on how many strings of yarn you're doing and your stitch pattern. Just gotta get it. It's in the black, that's why. A little tricky. This yarn is not necessarily the best yarn to do this with, but we're just going to put that on the peg beside it. And then we're going to knit over. And that's decreasing that one. And then you can kind of go over and pick another section and do the same thing. I don't feel it matters which way you go. I mean, you may find that it does. So it's basically how you want it to be. Like I said, it's a little tricky with 3 strands trying to get them all. And just move them over to the other peg. Oh, come on. It doesn't usually fit me this much. Of course, I'm not usually holding it up like this when I'm doing it. Okay. Oh, I do not like this yarn. The yarn's not bad, just a couple of them are fraying a little more, so it makes it a little trickier for me to move it. And then you knit that one over. Then you're looking and you're like, okay, we got one over there, we got one over there, let's get one over in this section over. Knit that over. And then you're going to look and you're saying, okay, you're going to see what other section you need to do one in. And we'll do one over here. Now the decreasing part is as many ways as you feel you need to decrease it. You may only decrease it once and then continue making the hat the way you would normally do. You may decide to do a couple more rows and then decrease again. So we did one, and once you're doing like one, then go ahead and just wrap the pegs that have the loop on it. I almost wrapped the wrong loop. Just wrap the ones that have the loops still on the peg. and then knit them over. Excuse me. Now you may want to do 1 or 2 rows with them decreased once. That's going to be up to you. And it's up to you how many times you actually want to do it, basically how tapered you want it to be at the end. Okay, so we can knit them all over. Now you can decide to decrease again at this point, or you can go through it one more time. Like I said, because I'm running low on this color yarn, I'm going to go ahead and decrease one more time just to show you. If this doesn't come out good size for a baby head, I'll use it for like a doll head. Because I have this much, I don't know how much is in there. So, make sure it's okay. So if we were to decrease again, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the pegs that you already decreased by. And then you're just going to kind of work, like this one we already took off, it's empty. So maybe we'll come over here and we'll move this one onto this peg. So it's kind of like a moving over type game. So we're going to move this one over and make sure it's placed on the one next to where we had it emptied. So see, it would look like that. And you can knit it over. Go find the next one that you did that to. And basically I'm working on the same side, so I'm going to the right of it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm moving it back over to the left one. And this is probably all the decreasing I'm going to do for this hat. Okay, so knit that over, find the next one. And like I said, this one's empty, this one has a peg, that one has a peg, so go here. And then basically you're taking a right to the left, basically. Or if you're right left-handed, you're going to just do it the opposite way. Okay, get my thing to the food. Black. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to knit over. And then is there any more? Okay, I think we've done all 4 of them. Now what you can also do to make sure you don't redo another decrease around is actually go ahead and move the pegs over, but don't knit them over until you do all the sections, and then go around and knit it. That way you don't feel like you're redoing a knitted section that you didn't do. So now I'm not going to decrease it anymore. That's going to be okay for me for the rest of the hat. If you decide that you want to do a few more rows and decrease again, you're going to do the same thing. Excuse me, you're going to find your empty peg, but then you're going to have one there, you're going to have this one empty. So then you would go here and be like, okay, take this one to that one, kind of thing. So that basically it's almost like on every other peg is going to be left. Well, probably not every other peg because you're not going to probably have it that emptied. But basically you're looking at an empty peg, one with one loop, an empty peg that we just did. So the next time you would take this one and move it over to make another empty peg right here. So it's kind of what it's doing. It's kind of almost if you ever played that game with the pegs on the board and you have to move them around so there's like one left. That's kind of the same concept here, is you're moving the loops over till it gets obviously smaller and smaller, and then we're going to take it off like we normally do and cinch it up, and you won't notice it that much. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just keep knitting it until I'm ready to take it off, and then I'll show you that part. Okay, for the sake of this video, I went a little further, show you, and I'm actually going to take it off a loom now, which I know is not going to probably be the exact size for a normal kid's hat. I know that I don't have a lot of this yarn left, and I just want to show you how we normally take a hat off anyway. So you have your decreasing around, and you can kind of see it. And you can choose not to do it. Like I said, it's probably looking more of like a gap because I did the decreasing one after another in a way. So you may want to do a decreasing, add a couple rows, do another decreasing, add a couple rows, decide if you want to do more decreasing or not. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's going to look a little more of a gap, because we did it almost one eye after the other. So take this off. You're going to cut yourself a tail. Scissors would work here. Definitely need to get some new scissors, I think. Okay. So we have the tail here, and then we're going to cut an extra string off of here. I'm going to use all 3 strands just because that's what I did with the project. And I'm going to make sure I have plenty. I know that's the other reason I wanted to stop sooner. I want to make sure I have plenty of yarn. Definitely need to clean the scissors. Okay. So we can put that yarn aside, and then what we're going to do, I'm going to find the beginning again. We're going to give another tail next to the tail that we have. And then all we're going to do, or all I do, is I kind of wrap it around that peg a little bit to anchor it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hook and go through the loop and then grab my yarn that I want to pull through to take it off the loom. So using 3 strands makes it a little trickier. But you're going to just pull it through completely. If you don't want that dangling there, you can kind of hold it in your hand. You don't want to lose this because you're going to use this to tie it with later. So kind of hold that in your hand or just keep an eye on it so you don't lose it. And then once you get it through the loop, you can take it off the loop. So what I'm doing, you see, is I'm going through the loop to grab this line, as if you're purling in a way, and pulling it all the way through, and then taking it off the loop, or the peg. I'm going to do that, tangle here, do that all around the loom. So we're going through that one loop, pulling out the string. I mean, sometimes I have to do this with a needle, but I actually started realizing that this way was a little faster, because then I don't have to strand it. And see, I almost did it too far, so you want to make sure you still leave yourself that tail to tie with. So keep an eye on how much you're tugging on it so you don't lose it. Like decreasing it, that's the way I view it. I mean, there could be different ways. So you basically kind of have to decide for yourself how you want to decrease, do some other research, find some other videos if you don't like the way that I did it. But the half brim idea is pretty simple. I mean, I just, figured it would work. And like I said, if you probably wanted it different, you could maybe find some way to put a little plastic in there as long as the yarn covers it so nobody sees that you have plastic in there. You could probably take like an old milk jug and cut it like a moon-ish type shape probably and tuck that in there if you wanted, as long as there's no edges that would poke you. Because I don't know how cardboard would work exactly, so almost back to the beginning. And like I said, you're basically doing it like you would a normal hat anyway. Keeping track of the tail to make sure I'm not pulling too hard. Almost back to the beginning. Keeping an eye on the tail. I mean, you don't need a huge tail, you just need to make sure you have enough to tie it with. And it is a little tricky because I'm using 3 strands, so I have to pay more attention to what I'm doing and not pulling that. So. And what I did is I had this leftover yarn and I rolled it as a ball all at once, so that way I wouldn't have to have 3 different skeins of yarn. I just decided to put all the yarn together into one ball. So that's another idea you can do if you know you're going to be working with 2 strands of yarn, go ahead and immediately roll them into a ball together, and then that way you don't have to worry about 2 skeins at once. So I'm on my last loop. Take off. Okay, I'm going to take that off, and then we can get rid of the loom and get rid of our tool. Okay, and then you're going to turn this hat inside out by tying it. Make sure you get all the strings. And then you're just going to tie it like you do a normal hat, but basically you're going to pull on it to close it off. And you tie it. I usually double tie it, just because I'm weird that way. I like to make sure it's secure. Okay, and then you're going to cut off the excess that you don't need. Okay. Over there. And there is our little hat with the half brim. actually came out really cute. I think it's actually going to fit my doll's head. Hang on one second, I'll get my daughter's doll and we'll put it on there and you can see what it looks like. I found my daughter's baby doll wearing the hat. Give me an idea of how you have the hat. I mean, it's not exactly the right size for this baby, but you can kind of see how it works up when it's on a head. Because it obviously won't fit my daughter's head or fit me. So there it is with the little half brim. So, kind of cute, huh? So, I mean, you got this, and this kind of, like I said, depending on the yarn you use, it kind of sticks out on its own, as you can see. When we did the decreasing, I don't know how well you can see that on the baby. Let me see if I can lighten my screen up a little bit so you can see it a little more. Yeah, you can see a little better how it looks on the side. Yeah. And that's with the decreasing, it kind of, I mean, this is the baby doll's head. And it kind of actually fits pretty well. I know, really good size for this doll. So, I think that's kind of funny. So there is our half brim hat with a little decreasing in there. And what's cool sometimes with these kind of hats, depending on the stitches you use, you can almost like reverse it and try it too. You might like the stitches on the other side. I've done that before where I'm like, I actually like the stitch on the other side better. So yeah, you can even reverse it around. And by doing this, you kind of see where we did the tight stitch up here when we first did it. I don't know if I like this one inside out, but I have done it before where I've turned a hat inside out because I like the inside look of it versus the outside. But it's still got the half brim. So there you go. A little idea to do the next time you want to do a hat. Oops. I had to close one window. Okay.